In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can use Bitmap to Material 3 to convert traditional maps such as our diffuse, specular, and normal into PBR maps. So we had a user question come in where the user had just the traditional maps, again, diffuse, normal, and specular, and they wanted to be able to convert these to PBR maps for use inside of Unity. And so we can use Bitmap to Material 3 to help us in this process. So let's run through some tips on how we might actually do this. So I have the maps here. I'm going to take just the diffuse texture to start, and here just on my second monitor, on the desktop I have the texture, and I'm just going to left click, drag and drop, and just move it over here into my 2D view, and then let go of the left mouse button, and that's going to give me this pop-up dialog. And I have Bitmap to Material 3 already loaded here inside of Substance Player. If you're using the indie version, you're just going to run the actual Bitmap to Material 3 application. And so here I'm going to choose Load In Main Input Tweak. And so here's the diffuse texture that we have. Now let's start with a little bit of configuration first. Here, if I go to geometry, if I have the mesh, I can actually load the mesh. In this case, I don't actually have the mesh, so I'm going to use just this default cube to kind of demonstrate this workflow. But again, you can use your own mesh if you want. For materials, if we go to default shader, we have two different types of materials here. We have physically based and then spec gloss. And depending on the workflow that you want to use, you could choose either one of these shaders. If you're using Unity, you have both shaders available to you. If you're watching this and you're an Unreal user, you can only use the physically based. In this case, let's just go with the physically based specular glossiness workflow. And so I have this shader selected. Now, if we come over here to my views, first thing I'm going to do is take my output size. Let's change this to the target resolution, which would be 2048. So I have this resolution here, and then I can come up to the top here, and I can just fit this to view so we can see what we're doing here. Now, you may not see both of these views. If you want to set this up, you can hit this little button here. You can click this, and you can actually say split view vertically or split horizontally. So for instance, if I do this, you can see now I have 3 views. So it can be kind of confusing a little bit on how you manage or close these guys. So here I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to go to close view, because I'm only going to work with 2 views at once. So just to let you know, you can actually split these views. And notice here that I have a bunch of channels. So right now we have base color. Let's just fit this to view. So here we have base color, roughness, metal, and so on. So we have a lot of these channels. After we've actually set our output size, we're going to want to come down here to our outputs and then configure the outputs that we want to work with. So like I said, in my case, for this demonstration, we chose just to use spec gloss. Again, it could be metal rough if we want. So what I'm going to do is turn off my base color, and I'm going to turn off my roughness. Notice that you can see these outputs going away here. Now, metallic. We are going to leave metallic enabled. Now, even though we're using spec gloss, we still need to utilize this metallic input because it's going to generate a mask for us that we're going to use in our specular. This is actually kind of a bug right now the way this works, because you shouldn't have to have this output enabled, and so this is something that we have logged in our system. So in future versions of Bitmap to Material, you won't actually have to have this metallic channel enabled, but the workflow will be the same. So anyways, we're going to leave this enabled now in case you were wondering, well, spec gloss, why is metal enabled? Okay, so next we want to enable our specular channel, and we want to enable our glossiness channel. We're going to leave normal on. Height we don't need, so we'll turn this off, and then we'll leave our ambient occlusion on. So now we have our channels. Let's move this guy over here so we have our outputs. Let's switch this guy into diffuse. So I'm just going to click these arrow buttons until I find diffuse in here. And actually don't even have it enabled, do I? Nope. So here's diffuse. I just need to enable that guy. And so now we should have diffuse. I just saw it. Where is it? Specular diffuse. Here we go. Okay, so now we have diffuse. And the next thing we'll do, just real quick, is let's come over here to our normal. So here's our normal. And Bitmap to Material is trying to generate a normal map from this diffuse input automatically. So this is something that Bitmap to Material 3 does. However, we already have this. We're converting maps. We're not generating from a single source image, so we don't really need this. So what I'm going to do is, again, just go over to my desktop where I have the normal map. I'm going to just left click, drag and drop that here into the view here, and I'll just let go of the mouse button. And in my drop up, I'm going to choose this load in, this one here at the top, load in normal optional tweak. And so I have that enabled. Now I need to go to my relief tab, and underneath my relief input, it's set to off. I'm going to switch this to from normal input. And I'm going to take the relief input opacity. Well, first I'm going to change my blending mode. So instead of combine, which means it would combine a normal map information that I have with this generated normal map that bitmap to material 3 created. So I don't want that. I actually just want to interpolate this, and that means I can just basically move from 0% opacity all the way up to 1 in terms of, am I showing the generated map or am I showing the actual normal map that I loaded in? And that's what we want to use. We want to use our from normal input. So let's just scroll this guy all the way to 1. And when I do that, you can see that we're now viewing 100% the normal map that I placed it in for the normal input. And in this case, this particular map, this is actually looks like this format here is just different, or it's looks like it's OpenGL format where I'm using DirectX. So no problem. We'll just change our normal input format here to OpenGL. And so we're just doing this so we can just view what this looks like here in this 3D view. Now, this normal map, I don't really have to do this because I have the normal map already. I'm just doing this here in this case so that we can better view what we're working with here. So now we have our normal map set. Let's go back and talk about this diffuse. Now in this case, this diffuse map that we have looks pretty good already. If we take a look, and I say looks pretty good in terms of creating an albedo map. If we take a look at this guy, we don't have any really too dark values. Maybe this ring here, let's just put this guy up at like 100% and we'll scroll around. Having a small display issue here. When I start to move this guy around, notice that this 3D view is going white. Zoom my view out here, it goes back to normal, so just ignore that. It's not it's just some kind of a display glitch there. So I was just looking at this dark area here. This actually could be just a little too dark in terms of value for albedo, but it actually looks pretty good. So in the case of this map here that we see, as far as the tonal dark ranges, it's looking pretty good. One of the things that we need to think about in terms of creating PBR maps is that when we have an albedo map like this, we want to make sure that we fall within specific ranges. If we think of that in terms of sRGB, we don't typically want any values darker than 30 sRGB. And so with this, you can see that, yeah, we're pretty much in a good range here. If we want to tweak this, we could come over to our tabs and go to diffuse color, and then we have some luminosity, we have the ability to do some light cancellation, just some different settings here to kind of help us kind of lift these values here. So just a little bit of image editing, probably your luminosity and your contrast and stuff, so we could try to lift those values. In our case, this is looking pretty good actually, so we don't need to really worry about that. We also have some other things, light equalizer, and that probably will never really come into play if you are utilizing like a diffuse map that you've already generated, because it's probably something that's hand painted or something that's already been pre-processed anyways. These type of settings for like light equalizer, which is basically trying to remove shadow and highlight from source images like photographs and stuff, probably won't need to utilize that. But in our case, we're looking pretty good in terms of an albedo map here. So we have our albedo, diffuse, we have our normal, and so now we want to start taking a look at our specular and our glossiness. So if we come over to glossiness, we can see that, well, as of right now, Substance here, bitmap to material 3 is already starting to generate some gloss information for us. So what we're going to do in this case is probably leave this guy alone for now, and we're going to take a look at our specular. I'll tell you one thing I think I might do is I'm going to change my output size. I might just take this back down to 512, and then let's fit this guy to view. So just because of the screen capture and what I'm kind of working with here, we'll lower the resolution just so when I fit this to view at this size, it looks better in the actual video itself. But again, the nature of Substance, we can change this at any point in time. Okay, so 512 just so we can see this better. Now you can see what the glossiness map looks like. Again, we'll tweak this here in a bit, but it's kind of already started this generation for us. Now we need to really go in and discuss our specular. So this is where we're going to have to do some work. Now our specular map by default, what you see here is just this plain gray image. And what's going on here is this is actually kind of a holdover from the metal rough workflow. So with bitmap to material 3 in the metal rough workflow, typically you can't really change the specular value for dielectrics. Now this value that you see here is just this default 4% range, which is kind of like a hard-coded value that's in the shader for metal rough workflow. There are options in engines such as Unreal 4, or if you're working with Substance Designer, where you can actually feed a value into what they call a specular channel. So it's specular in UE4, and in Substance Designer we call it specular level, where you can override this 4% value that's hard-coded. But in Bitmap to Material 3, we do not yet have the ability to do that. So what you're viewing right here, when you look at this specular map, you can look at this and say, "Oh, it's totally gray. What's going on?" So all this is just filling that specular map with this default 4% value for dielectric material. So if we look at what this diffuse is, I can see some areas here which look like there or indicate to me that these could be metal. So these kind of bright areas like this, around in here and here, we want to make these metal. And then some of these other areas, which this looks like this could be metal as well, but it's probably more of like a treated metal, so it looks like it might have like a dielectric layer over top of it. Obviously this wood would be dielectric. So all of the areas that are non-metal right now would have this default 4% value. Again, kind of going back to this in terms of just PBR theory, this 4% is going to be fall within a range where most common dielectric materials like wood, plastic, stone, stuff like that are all going to fall within this range anyway. So that's why you see a lot of times this can just let go at this 4%. However, there are other dielectric materials, some of which can be exceptions like gemstones, where they fall without of that 4% range. So it would be good to have a manual control over that. And as of right now in Bitmap to Material 3, we do not actually have a control for that. So, like I said, we have this 4% value. This is all gray. We need to start to introduce some metalness to this. So we need to basically make a mask so that we can say what areas are dielectric and what areas are metal. And that's a good point to bring up in terms of, again, kind of theory-based workflow of PBR in itself. One of the things that I find with PBR is that when you are starting in the mindset of this, you really start to break down objects by their actual surface attributes. Is this material metal? Is this material a non-metal? And if you kind of start with that question, is it metal or is it not metal, that really kind of helps you in the process of being able to design these values that you need. So for instance, if we ask ourselves the question, is this metal or is it not metal? So for instance, let's look at this wood. Is it metal or is it not metal? Well, we know that it's not metal, so this is a dielectric. That means that the value here of this 4% reflectance value here in our specular map is going to work just fine for us. If we look at this treated metal area here, if we look at that and say, well, is it metal, is it non-metal? Technically it's a metal, but it has a dielectric layer on top, so that means it needs to be treated as a non-metal, which means, again, this 4% value is probably going to work for us in this case. However, we have this area here, which is going to be raw metal, so that means that, well, it's not dielectric, it is a metal. We need to indicate that. So this is where, like I said, it's going to take some work to do that, because there's not really a perfect one-click solution to handle something like this. So now let's start working on this process of introducing some value here to our specular map. So let's just close the base color up, and let's just focus in on our metallic. So we have two ways we can work through this. In here we have our metallic creation method, and we have from main input, and then we have this metallic input. Now from main input means that we're going to use this this keying system here to try to pull a matte, so to speak, out of our diffuse so that we can create some value here into our specular. And so that's, like I said, that's one way we can work. Another way would be to use this metallic input. Now notice here it says drop a bitmap here. Same as we did with our normal map, we could drag and drop in a bitmap that basically is a mask to let Bitmap to Material 3 know what areas are going to be metallic and what areas are going to be non-metallic. We don't actually have this matte at this time, so what we're going to do is set this over to from main input, and we're going to start by creating a key for this. And like I was saying, this is going to be the most work here. This is going to be where we're going to have to get our hands dirty, so to speak, because we need to start to derive these values. And like I said, there's a couple ways to do this. I would say probably the best way would be to utilize a hybrid of maybe some automatic setting and some hand-painted masks. So let's start here with this metallic creation method, and from our metal from diffuse keying type, what we're going to do is come in and we're going to first set a color that we need to key. Now to do that, let's put our view here at, like, say 400%, and if we start to just kind of zoom around here in the view, what we're trying to do is look for some value here within these metal regions that are going to be areas of like the pure raw metal. So what we're looking for is the actual metal reflectance values. In this particular diffuse, I can see that we have some dirt and some grungy areas like that. So we want to make sure we don't sample like these areas. So what I'm going to do is just kind of zoom around here on the mesh just to try to find, or excuse me, the bitmap, and just try to find something. Now this strip right here looks like it might be pretty good. So let's take this color editor. Let's grab our pick value. Again, my 3D view here is kind of freaking out on me right now, so we don't need to worry about what that white was. So I'm going to come over into this area, and I'm just going to sample one of these bright values here. So something like this. So I'm going to sample this value, and I'm actually probably just going to pull that up just a little bit because I don't think that I really sampled what that actual value was too well. So here what we're doing again, like I said, was we're looking for this metal reflectance value. This is going to be in a range of around 70 to 100% specular for an actual, polished, smoothed, or raw metal, we'll say. And so for that, I'm picking this value, and we're going to use this as our key color. Here we need to be careful over the color value that we're selecting in this diffuse map. Traditional diffuse textures were not authored to be physically correct, so the value we choose for metal in the diffuse texture needs to be a value that is at least 60 to 70% specular. So from the metal from diffuse keying type, we could do chrominance, luminance, or RGB. For this operation, I want to set this to RGB because we're, of the values that we're working with. And I'm going to come over here to my range and my softness, and I can start to adjust my range. Now, as I start to do this, you can see that I'm basically pulling out a matte here. Now, let's take our view and drop this back down to fit here so we can see everything. Now, notice that we're starting to get this pure black here in our diffuse map now. And so what's happening is we're making a mask, and we're taking our specular, and we're putting this metal reflectance value. So we're, areas that we have indicated through our color range here that we're doing, this color range operation, areas that we are considering to be raw metal, we're placing those values here into our specular map, which is good. We're picking up some wood. We'll have to fix this. But for now, we're starting to pick this up. Our areas of non-metal, our dielectric here, are still getting that 4% specular range. Now our diffuse is black, and that's because the raw metal values don't actually have a diffuse color. So black is what it needs to be, and so bitmap to material 3 is automatically placing this black into this area. So it might be more helpful for us to actually view the metallic output because this is giving us the mask. And remember when I said before that we have to enable this metallic output. If you don't have this enabled, you won't get any of this value here in your metallic or your specular. And like I said, that's a bug right now. You have to have that metallic enabled. But viewing this metallic map can help us, take a look at this mask that we're working with here. So I'm just going to increase maybe my softness a little bit. Let's go into this color range value, and if we just start to maybe move this value manually, you can see what we can get. So I'm going to just pull this value down a little bit more. Again, what I'm thinking of here is the actual mask itself. The wood is getting picked up a lot in this area, and we're gonna have to manually fix that. So I'm not really gonna worry about that for now. Right now we're viewing this at 512. Let's take this over it to 2K and see what it's doing. So here we're in our black. I was just making sure that we're not spilling over too much in some of this area. Notice here we do have some holes to pick up and things like that. So our keying value isn't working 100% what we need it to do. Let's see if we can adjust our softness range. No, we don't want to do that. Maybe we'll just pull our key value up. Okay, by introducing too much range, you can see that we're picking up too much of this area here. So let's just drop this down again. And you can kind of see what's happening here in our 3D view. So here you can see where we're starting to really start to pull out some of these metal areas. Let's see if I can just move my light here so you can see where the metal starting to look more like metal because we're starting to set that reflectance value correct in our specular. Let's just do this. Let's just pull this metal value up some more, and I'm just going to let this go in. Yeah, we're getting too much of the speckled area in this case. It's not too bad though. If I kind of zoom in, you can see what it looks like. It's taking some of this painted area here, this metal that looks like it's more like that has this dielectric layer, and kind of scraping some of it away and kind of revealing some that raw metal underneath, so it's kind of helping us with like a little bit of a wear. But you know, this is probably something you may or may not want on an already kind of pre-authored map like this. So like I said, this is where we got to get our hands dirty, because it's not going to be like a complete and total, like, you know, great way to handle this. So, you know, in this case, we're going to have to kind of split the difference here. Let's see if I can just adjust that key color a little bit more. So here, let's just pull the value up. And then let's see if we can adjust our range a little bit. Yeah, not too good. But anyways, you know, this is probably going to be the best that we can kind of get with this mask in this kind of way. Which means we're going to have to do some hand painting to this guy. But if we take a look, if this fit our diffuse, this is what our diffuse looks like now, and this is looking correct. We have black everywhere. We have indicated raw metal here. If we take a look at our specular map, this is what our new specular map is going to look like. This is a PBR spec map. And so now what we would probably do with this guy is take this metallic map here, and we need to fix this wood, because you can see what it's doing to the wood. It's actually trying to make it metallic. If we take a look at this specular map, so we're indicating this area here to be metallic. You can see it's very bright, got kind of like this yellowish kind of you know, brownish type value here, and this is completely incorrect for this dielectric of this wood. It's actually going to be just this value here. So you can see the stark difference that we're getting. So here's what we'll do. We'll go to our metallic map. We've got it already generating at 2048 by 2048. Let's just right click and save this as a bitmap. And I'm going to call this mask. I think I already have this saved on the desktop. So let's just save this mask. And then let's jump over to Substance Designer. Okay, so here we are in Substance Designer. Let's go and link in this bitmap. So here I'm just going to go out to my desktop and grab mask and open it up. And so here's the mask that we were working with. Now we need to just, you know, start to tweak this guy here and fix some things. So let's just drag this here into our graph. You could use Photoshop to do this if you want, or, you know, any other image editing application. Here I'm just going to double click my actual diffuse texture that I had. This is the one, this is my traditional diffuse texture that we started with. And I'm just going to make a holdout mask here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my space bar, and I'm going to grab this SVG here, and I'm going to say from new resource, and I'm going to click OK on this. And so we have this SVG. I'm going to switch this to grayscale, and I'm going to change the background to white. And then I'm going to now double click this old diffuse map. So we load this here into our 2D view. Then I'm going to single click this SVG node. Now this allows me to edit the SVG node while viewing my diffuse map, because I want to see where I'm going to quickly draw this mask. So here I'm going to grab my pen tool, and I have it set to path, and I have this set to black, because remember our background is white, and we want to just basically put this kind of black shape here to kind of hold out this wood. So let's zoom in on this area, grab our pen tool, and let's just quickly go through and just make a mask of this wood area here. So yeah, depending on what application you want to use, you know, Photoshop, Substance, either way is fine. So we have something like this. I'm a little sloppy. If I wanted to, we could go in and start to kind of tweak this somewhat. But for this demonstration, we'll just kind of leave this be. So now if we look at our actual SVG, we have this shape. So let's combine these two guys together. So let's just hit the space bar. We'll grab a blend here, and let's put this, our new shape in the foreground and our mask in the, whoops, mess these guys up here. Okay, so we're going to put our SVG in the foreground and our mask here in the background. We'll double click, so we're viewing the operation now, and let's just change this blending mode here to multiply. And so here we have our original mask, and now we've just kind of blocked out this piece of wood here by just putting this black over top. So this is our new mask here. Now we may want to go in and start to kind of clean up some of these areas, and so let me just show you a way that that I would handle that. So one way would be to go in and let's add a bitmap. So we'll say from new resource, and we want to make sure that we set our background color. So let's make sure that we set this to white before we generate the texture. So we have this set at 2048 and white. We'll click OK. And so we have this new bitmap. Let's hit the space bar again. Let's grab our blend node. And so we're just going to layer up these operations. Let's grab this bitmap, and on the parameters, we need to set that to grayscale. So we'll drag this guy in here. Let's grab our blend node. Let's set this to multiply. And so now we'll double click, and then here is our texture. So we double click this blend, so we're viewing this operation here in our 2D view. And then let's single click the bitmap node. Here we have our brush, and then we have this set to black. And then we can go in and we can just start to work with this guy. So if we want to change our brush size here, and now I'll go in and just start to kind of paint this out. So here, let me just fix that size, and then just quickly kind of run through and just pick some of these kind of speckled areas that are showing up. And, you know, again, like I said, this is, you know, we're, you know, doing some manual work here, which is, you know, it's kind of a pain, but, you know, it's just, but there isn't really a great way to just automatically generate these maps for us. You know, we do have to do, you know, some of this type of work, but as you can see, you know, it's not too bad. We're just doing some just cleanup stuff. So like I said, I could just run through and just kind of clean this mask up here. Another way that we could work, this is the most manual version of this process, is, you know, creating the mask. We started with a key, we created the mask, and now we're just kind of cleaning up some of the areas. Here we're cleaning up the black, but then in these areas that are poking through, we could just, you know, clean these up, paint white on top of these if we needed to. Basically, like I said, just recreating or hand painting this mask. Another way to work that would make this more automatic is that if you have the mesh, you can assign, or if the mesh has these material IDs assigned to it already for areas on the mesh that are the metallic material and the non-metallic material, you can use the bakers to help this. So for instance, let's say here that I have this mesh. Let me just right click and say bake model information. And let's say that on this mesh, this is the mesh that I had originally had that diffuse, that traditional diffuse, normal, and spec map applied to. I could then go in and say, okay, well, my arms and my body are the materials that correspond to the metallic areas, and the hands and the optics, let's just say in this particular case, are the dielectric or the non-metal areas. So what I would do is I would just come into these materials and I would say, okay, well, all the metal areas I want to be white. So let's make these guys white, and then all the dielectric areas, I'm just going to make these guys black. And then I would come over to my baker. Let's just fix our window here. Let's come over to our baker and let's add the UV to SVG. Now this baker is going to flood the UV shells with some type of color value depending on what I choose for the color mode. So here I'm going to set this to material ID color, which means it's going to derive that color from the material IDs. Now here in Designer, I've manually set these, but if I already had these set in my 3D program when it came in, it would pull whatever values are in this area. So I can either set it in the 3D program or override it here in Substance. So now that I have this in place, I would just hit bake, and then I could quickly create myself this mask that I need that's going to be black and white, and it's going to be masked perfectly, you know, based on the material ID selection. So that is, you know, the best automatic way of creating this mask for me. But, you know, if you're in a case where, you know, maybe you don't have the mesh, you don't have the IDs, you don't have all that, it could be, you know, just as quick to go in and just hand paint this as we're doing here. So here I've just gone through and I've just painted in some more of these kind of speckled areas just to kind of, you know, round out the mask a bit more. Another thing that I did was I just added a new bitmap resource, set the background to black when I created this bitmap, added a new blend node, this time changed the blending mode to max lighten, and they just made this connection here. So here we were before, now we have this new blend node. Now double click to load this here into our 2D view. Let's single click this bitmap node, and so now we're going to paint with white, and then we can kind of come into this area and just quickly just try to paint out some of these areas that, you know, that the mask that we created inside of bitmap was just kind of biting into it too much and creating some of these speckled kind of black areas now. So here I'm just going through and just cleaning up my mask again. So just more cleanup work as we go across. So, you know, I could go in and use a combination of techniques. Like I said, it depends on what you're doing, but probably, you know, this hybrid approach of using, you know, the pen tool to create, you know, shapes that are easily, you know, that are easy to create, just using, you know, an SVG node, and then going in and just maybe using the bitmap tools just to kind of paint out, you know, some of these, you know, small speckled areas that, you know, that are gonna, that the actual keying method here that we used in bitmap to material 3 didn't really pick up too well. But like I said, you know, this is where we got to get our hands dirty. This is a little bit more of a, you know, the manual process of it, just to kind of clean up, you know, some of these areas where we're trying to denote the difference between metal and non-metal. But once we actually have this mask kind of in place, and, you know, we'll just leave it like this for now. So here from the viewport, I can just hit this save button here and perhaps just throw this here out at the desktop, and this could just be my mask. I'll just call it fixed, and we'll just place this here on the desktop. And then we'll just jump back over to bitmap to material. So here we are back in bitmap to material. Let me grab that map here that I have on my desktop. Here it is, mask fixed. So here on my desktop, it's off on the other monitor. I'm just doing a left click and drag here into my viewport. Let go of my left mouse button, and now I'm going to change this to load in my metallic input. And then so here under my metallic specular, I'm going to change the creation method from main input to metallic input. And so now you can see that we have our new mask in place, and we've kind of fixed this up. And so already you can see that we're going through the process. Here's our new diffuse map. Here's our new specular map. And here is our gloss. So you can see that we've gone through and we've started to further our progress on this conversion between that traditional diffuse specular normal map to this diffuse specular gloss PBR map. So here in the 3D view, you can see where we're starting to see the actual what the metallic looks like. Here, if we just kind of move our light here in the viewport, you can see what our metallic looks like, our non-metallic. Here in our wood, you can see what our wood is starting to look like. Now, some of this is a bit shiny, probably because we now need to go into the process of maybe taking a look at our roughness map itself. So, well, actually our glossiness map. So here we're viewing our glossiness map. Let's, like I said before, let's just drop this down to 512. And I'm going to fit this to view just because here in this case, we can fit this to view and take a better look at the settings here at this resolution. So now we'll go into our rough gloss, and then we can start to tweak this guy here. So now if we take a look at our roughness, as I start to, we can work with our roughness on a global level here. So here I'm just starting to move my roughness information, and then here we'll just kind of look in our viewport. That looks a bit better here on the wood that we had before. So if we move it this way, we get really shiny here in our metal, but our wood's a little bit too shiny. So let's just pull this value here for our glossiness. So that looks a little bit better for our wood. Now we can go into our metal rough influence. Now that we have been creating this mask will also carry over to this metal rough influence. So let's go back to this gloss and let's dial in this metal rough influence. So here you can see that when I start to adjust this, if we start to pull this guy back this way, we now get our metal to be more shiny. So here you can see how shiny it is now, but it's not really affecting that wood anymore. We start to kind of look at what that wood's doing. So, the more detailed we kind of work on that mask, you can see where it is going to be beneficial for us to, make sure that mask looks pretty good. But you can see, just in this video, not really a whole lot of work, and, we're getting some pretty nice results in this conversion process. And, like I keep saying, it is a manual process. We gotta get in and do some massaging, but for the most part, bitmap to material 3 becomes a pretty powerful tool in helping us through this process. I mean, definitely beats going in and just saying, all right, well, I can't use my traditional maps at all anymore. I got to throw them out and start over. So, you don't have to do that. We could use these guys here as a start. Then let's see our next map that we can start to work with. Let's jump over here to our ambient occlusion here, and we can start to just make some of our settings here in our ambient occlusion. So you can see that we can work with our levels and things like that, and just kind of go in and start to adjust this ambient occlusion here to get this the way we want. And there we go. So at this point, we can go ahead and call these textures converted. So we started with a traditional diffuse, normal, and specular map, and we've converted that to an actual PBR map, which in our case is in the specular glossiness workflow. You saw that how we were able to use bitmap to material 3 to kind of get us started. We used some of the keying methods here from our metal specular rollout to kind of get us, a kind of a rough mat in place. We then jumped over to Substance Designer to clean that map up a bit, and then imported that back in as this metallic input to further control or to fine-tune the control of what that metallic map is doing when it gets placed here into our specular information. And then finally, in our roughness, we were able to set our roughness value and then be able to utilize that mask that we were creating and vary our roughness, between the dielectric and the rough materials by dialing in this metal roughness influence value. And so here is the result that we get. Now that we're finished, we could just simply come up and just export our bitmaps, and then we would have our textures ready to go into the application or the game engine that we want to utilize. So here I thought we would just take this a little bit farther. So like I said, the process would be once we're finished, we'd export these bitmaps. However, I'm going to come over to my outputs, and you can see here that I have enabled my curvature. And what we're viewing here is my curvature map. So I'm outputting curvature, ambient occlusion, and my diffuse spec gloss maps. And so now that I have this curvature and everything, I would then go into my export my bitmaps, and let's just make sure I output, I don't want to output bump, but ambient occlusion, curvature, normal, gloss, spec, and diffuse. And so let's output these guys. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile these maps down in Substance Designer, and I'll basically make a substance material out of all these maps. And we'll add some weathering effects and things like that. So we're going to completely like take this thing from using what some traditional maps that you may have like diffuse, spec, norm, and we're going to take this all the way through the substance pipeline. So now that we have this exported, let's jump over to Substance Designer. Okay, so here we are in Designer. I've started a new graph. So what I've done here is just go to File, New Substance, and here I've just chosen Spec Gloss. For this actual material, I'm just using the default geometry again, and the material for this guy, shader, we've set this to physically specular gloss. So now I have my maps that I've just linked in as a resource. So here in my PBR utilities, I'm going to grab my base material node here. And on my base material node, I am going to just quickly set this guy to spec gloss. And then I'm going to come over to all the way down here towards the bottom, let's see here, to my user-defined maps. And I'm going to enable diffuse, normal, specular, glossiness, ambient occlusion. And now that I have these guys, let's grab my spec, normal, let's see, gloss, diffuse, and ambient occlusion. Let's take these maps and just drag and drop and place those here into my graph. And let's hook these maps up real quick. So let's see, I got everything in place here. First thing I need to do is my diffuse, which is this guy. Here's my normal. I'll put these guys into order as we do this. So here's my normal. And next up is my glossiness, which I believe is this guy here. Yes, glossiness. Let's plug this guy in. And finally, here I have my specular, which is this guy. And then here's my ambient occlusion. Let's put this guy into place. So here's my ambient occlusion. So now here I have these maps in place. I could just right click and I can view in 3D view. And so here you can see that we now have our maps outputting here into our 3D view, and we've taken all these maps, and using the base material node we've basically compiled these guys down into a single material like this. So we'll just kind of move this out of the way. Now here's my actual base outputs. I don't have these guys into place just yet. For my output nodes, I have diffuse, norm, spec, and gloss. I don't have an ambient occlusion. So let's hit the space bar on this guy, and let's add a new output. And let's come over to the add item, and let's set its usage type to ambient occlusion. Alright, and I'm doing that because once I finally output these to the main outputs, I want to be able to utilize that ambient occlusion. So here's what we have thus far here in our setup, and you can see that again, how we were using bitmap to material 3 to kind of start us on the process. So now let's say that we want to do something like maybe utilize some edge wear and things like that. So let's do this. Let's come over to our actual material filters. Let's go to blending, and I'm going to grab a material color blend node. So we'll bring this guy here into place. Let's select this node before we get started and go to our channels, and let's turn off base color. Let's turn off all the things that we're not going to use. So we're not going to use roughness. We're not going to use metallic. Let's see, we're not going to use height. We will use ambient occlusion. And I believe that's everybody. Okay, so now we'll just take our materials and we'll just hook these guys up. So now we need a mask here, this grayscale mask, and we're going to go to our mesh adaptive filters, mask generators, and let's just quickly grab one of these guys, like probably the metal edge wear. Where is he? There we go, metal edge wear. And so we'll just drag and drop, place this guy in. So let's take the mask and place that in here into the output of the metal edge wear, which is a mask. If we double click here, you can see that this is just the grunge map that we have thus far, and here's our grayscale mask. Now in order for this to work, we need to feed in some mesh data, and so for that mesh data, that is going to be well, we actually have that mesh data already, meaning that we need to have, if we hit 1 on the keyboard to expand our channels, we need a curvature and an ambient occlusion. But we utilized bitmap to material to create that for us. So here is a curvature, and here is our ambient occlusion. Now we could also generate these maps from a normal map here in Designer as well, but since we were starting with bitmap to material, we could just export those. And so now we're just plugging these guys into the mesh data. Actually, it's kind of overwriting there. So if you ever get in a situation where, like, see, I'm trying to plug this in and it's not really letting me do this right, you can just hit 1 on the keyboard. That's going to put you into standard mode, and that means that you can just manually hook these guys in. So curvature goes into the curvature input and ambient occlusion into the ambient occlusion. Now I'm hitting 3 on the keyboard just to kind of close everything up, just because it's a little neater. So now when I double click metal edge wear, I start to get the, this damage and stuff like this only on the actual edge wear itself. So here, let's go in and take this output here. So we'll double click this guy, and this is what we get. So let's take the output now from this material color blend, and let's put this here to our main outputs. And then we'll right click here in an empty space, and we'll say view outputs in 3D view. And so now we're viewing these outputs here in our actual 3D view for this. And so yeah, we have some settings that we need to change first. So let's come over here to this material color blend, and let's see how this mask is propagating down through our channels. So one thing that we probably want to do is we only really want to work with this here within, we probably only really want to work with this within the areas that basically are kind of like that metal, that treated metal area. So we have this mask here that we could utilize. And what I did was I created a new package, but I probably should have kept, that mask and stuff like that we were actually working with, which I didn't. So let's just do this. Let's probably grab hold of our metallic map, which I don't actually have. So I'm just going to jump over to bitmap to material, and I'm going to export my bitmaps here. And well, you know what? I already have it. I don't need to actually export that. Sorry, I'm just kind of thinking about this on the fly as I go. So here back in Substance Designer, all I'm going to do is just link in that bitmap, which is from my desktop. It is this mask here that well, actually mask fixed. So let's just import this guy in. And then so here we have mask fixed. Let's just drag and drop this guy here into our view, and then let's just put this into this optional mask input. And so when I do that here, you can see where it's basically putting these scratches on everything that's metal. Well, that's not going to work for us, so let's invert this guy. A couple ways we could do that. We could do it with a levels command, or here in the library, I can just do a quick search for invert, and we have invert grayscale. Let's grab this guy, and let's plug this in. So I'll double click, and now you see that we have this invert. Let's take the invert and plug that into the mask optional. Okay, so now we have that edge wear on everything except for the actual raw metal itself, so it's on the painted metal, which is what we want. We also have it here on our wood, so this would actually normally not be a problem, but like I said, I created a new graph and I deleted that wood mask that we made. So now I got to make it again. No problem, we'll just do it real quick. So here I'm just double clicking this node so I can kind of see what I'm doing. Let's go to SVG from new resource. We'll click OK. Here again, double click, load this guy into view. Single click to load the SVG into view. Let's grab our pen tool. Actually, let's make sure we're in grayscale. Let's make sure I get this right here. So I'm going to set my background to white, and we're going to be, masking out this wood just as we did before. So we have this guy selected. Let's grab my pen tool. I'm actually going to use black, and let's just draw this mask again. I'll be pretty sloppy with it just to kind of hurry here. Let's grab this guy here, and then we'll just mask this guy into place. So now we have this mask here. Let's come on down into this area. Okay, so real quick, let's just combine these two masks. So we'll go to blend, and here, let's put this guy here on the foreground, and then put this mask. So we have this shape here that we have, and then we have our mask that we inverted, and then we're going to take these guys here and let's just multiply those together. So this is the new mask that we get, and now we'll plug this into our mask optional, and so now you see that we've just masked out that wood. So just a quick recap of that. We had our original mask that we had. I needed to actually invert that because all the white areas, I really want these scratches and this damage to show up on these areas of this texture that look like it's more like this treated kind of painted metal, or metal with this kind of dielectric layer on top. I don't want any of this on the raw metal, and I definitely don't want any of this here on this wood. So that's why we invert this here. Now, to block this off the wood, we had to use our SVG again. I had to recreate it because I deleted it before. And then we're just simply combining this shape and this shape through a blending operation set to multiply. And then with the mask generator, all mask generators have this mask optional, so we could place this in. And so this is the mask that's getting generated. It gets passed up through this material color blend. Now, in the material color blend, early on, right before we hook this up, we set which channels we're going to be working with, so you can see which channels are enabled by true and false. And then with these channels enabled, we're basically going to be driving this effect. We're going to take this effect and we're going to propagate it through the channels that we have enabled. Now, we have all this set up. It's not looking great right now because we need to actually change these values for the channels themselves. So let's start with diffuse. So what are we actually doing here? Well, we have this metal edge wear, and the idea is that this particular mask generator is only showing up on areas such as, these areas that you see it showing up on, areas that I am indicating are metal, but they have like this dielectric paint layer, and I want to scrape that away and reveal some raw metal underneath of it. So when we reveal that raw metal underneath of it, what we need to do, since we're working in specular gloss, we need to say, well, it's raw metal, so remember its diffuse color needs to be black. So we're going to come in and we're going to set this to black. Okay, so here's what we're getting. So we're already getting some improvement here. So next up, let's go and take a look at our specular. And so now you can see that our specular, which for this mask that's being generated, it's going to correspond to raw metal. So we know now that we need to actually have this value be an actual metal reflectance value. So right now, if we look at it's pure white, that's not really what we want. Here's where we put in RGB value for a specific metal like titanium or whatever we're trying to create. If you want, you can actually come over here to our PBR utilities and grab hold of this guy here. This is our PBR metal reflectance. You can drag and drop this node in, and this is going to give us a metal color value. So if I just double click and I choose something like, say, titanium, and I'll click my info button here, if I mouse over, you can see here the RGB values for that. So I can actually grab these RGB values from that. So if I wanted to, I could do this here. Let's double click to load this value in. Let's select this node. Let's go to our RGB color. Let's do pick, and let's pick this value. So now I've actually set that to be the exact measured value that I need for that reflectance value based on titanium. So now that we've utilized that node here, I'll just remove that guy out of the way. And so now let's just double click, let's go back into our view, and let's look at what we're creating here. And so here in our view, you can see kind of how these scratches are working. Next, let's go to our glossiness. Now right now, what's happening is this glossiness is all the way up. So we're saying that this is, this metal that's being exposed is like super, super smooth. So I can actually drop this down quite a bit, and this will probably look a bit better. So now I've dropped, that smoothness value down. Maybe that's too dull. So let's move this value up just a little bit more. I'm just kind of eyeballing this to kind of get something that I might want to utilize. So maybe something more like this here. And so now I've introduced, in here some of this scratching and damage and things like that. And I've pretty much have everything set. My ambient occlusion, I'm not really going to mess with this for now. So now if we take a look at my diffuse map, we have more black areas in here where we're showing some of this raw metal. We've taken this damage mask here and we've propagated that effect down through all these channels. We have this set up. So we've taken this a bit further. If we want, we can go back to this metal edge wear now. And now that we have all this hooked up, and this is where true power of substance comes into play, is that we're now propagating this down through all of our channels. If I want to go in and increase my grunge amount here, you can see that now I'm increasing, getting this more grunge, less grunge. I can change my grunge scale, my wear amount, all these different types of settings here for this. So that might be too much. Let's take our grunge amount down. Maybe something more like this for now. So we got some of this wear across here. And instead of having to go and take this effect and basically copy and paste it into each layer and all that stuff, Substance is handling this for me. So as I go through and I change my settings, you can see, well, all those settings already propagated to my specular and to my glossiness and so on. Does that based on how I told that effect to work with these individual channels like this. So at this point, we have that material color blend in place. So we've further further tweaked this asset again, where we started with our traditional maps. We've converted those to PBR maps, and now we're starting to add some custom edge effects and stuff. So now we have this substance. We could take this edgeware, we could expose each one of these values, and then we could publish this guy. And then when we take this into, say, something like Unity, we now have our maps as PBR we now have our traditional maps converted as PBR. They've have this nice metal edgeware effect that allows me to change these values and things like that directly inside of Unity. And you can see, without too much work, we've gone through the process of being able to take some of these old assets that we may have and repurpose them so they'll work within this new kind of physically based models that we're going to see in programs like Unity 5. So one last thing that we'll do is let's just add one more effect. So here I'm going to come back over to my mask generators, and I'm going to grab a dirt generator. Let's go to our blending, and let's grab our material color blend. I'll kind of run through this one a bit quicker because it's going to be the same process basically. So with our material color blend, let's go into our channels and set this up. So we don't want base color. We do not want roughness or metallic. We do want our ambient occlusion, and we're going to turn off our height. So let's take the output of our previous material color blend, and let's hook up this material. So now we're just moving the material here down the chain as we go to output this, and we're going to modulate these channels here, these material channels, based off this dirt. So let's plug in our dirt, and our dirt takes some mesh data as well, and it's going to be our curvature and ambient occlusion. So let's take our ambient occlusion and plug this in, and let's just borrow our curvature just as before. So now we have this guy set up, and then let's come into our output, and let's just output this. So now that we have this output, this is what we're getting, by default, which is, really, really incorrect. So now all we have to do is just make a few tweaks. So let's come over to our material color blend, and let's look at our diffuse. So our diffuse color for this dirt, we're going to make it just something kind of dark like this. So here's our value. The next thing we'll do is our normal. I don't want this to affect the normal map, so I'm going to take the height opacity all the way down to 0. Now our specular is at white right now by default, which means it's like 100% specular, which we're talking about dirt. So dirt is a dielectric material, so we need to set this to the correct specular F0. And we can get to this by going to our PBR utilities, and I'm going to grab this PBR dielectric F0 node. So I'll bring this guy in, and if we just double click this, you can see that it's just outputting a value here. And if we take a look at this specular F0, we can hit this drop down, and we got a bunch of these different material types. Now, for the most part, these guys are utilizing, so for instance, we have like plastic, wood, stone, brick, sand, concrete, fabric, and so on. All of these different, specular F0, they're really going to fall roughly within that 4% range. So like I said, common dielectrics typically are going to fall in that range. So for instance, dirt, it's actually going to fall in the same range as, say, like plastic or wood. So I'm just going to use plastic, and I have a little bit of the specular range that I can change. Notice that as I change the slider here in the 2D view, we're not really getting much of a variance, and that's because these dielectric materials for these common materials like stone, brick, rock, things like that, their value's not going to vary. Their specular value is not going to vary too much, so that's why we can use this value. So now we'll go back to this material color blend. We'll select the color. We'll use our pick, and I'm just going to pick this value. And so now I've set this correctly. Now, the moment that I set this specular F0, you can see that we're already getting a drastic improvement here. However, it's very, very shiny, which is kind of cool. It's sort of, I mean, kind of in these areas, we can almost, this is one way that, you can think about trying to make something like puddles on brick and things like that, or on like a cobblestone road or something. But we don't want that, so we're going to come to our glossiness, and we're just going to drop the glossiness value all the way down. And so this is what we get. So here's how we're starting to get this dirt. Now that we kind of have this in place, let's go back to our dirt itself. Let's pull our edge masking up, and let's pull our dirt level down, and probably decrease our contrast here quite a bit, and maybe increase our grunge amount. So we'll do something like this, and then let's pull our dirt level down. I'm just kind of tweaking with these settings a bit just to kind of see what I can find that I might want to use. You can see what this is doing, like here in this kind of all the occluded areas, it's being driven by this ambient occlusion, is why we're getting this dirt get collected in this ambient occlusion area and things like that. So Just drop our dirt contrast down, maybe pull our grunge amount up, get something like maybe this. That's kind of a lot, but you know, kind of helps kind of drive home, you know, the demonstration here. So here, maybe we'll just increase our dirt level just a little bit more. There we go. We'll get something like that, and then again, just pulling down the dirt contrast. Maybe adjust the grunge amount a little bit. There we go. So it's just something like this, we'll say. So now we'll go ahead and call this guy finished. So, you know, like again, what we've done is we've taken, you know, that old diffuse specular normal map, we've processed it with bitmap to material, and now we've run it through, you know, we've brought it back into Substance, we've compiled all these maps down into a single material. Here we've ran it through 2 more of these weathering filters, edgeware and dirt, and now we're piping these out here to our outputs. And just as I said before, we now have this full substance that we can then export to Unity, and then we can expose, just like I talked about with the metal edgeware, we could also expose our dirt parameters, so that we can have these parameters like dirt level and edgeware all accessible to us when we're inside of Unity. So that's going to close out this video. Hope you found this useful on how we can use bitmap to material and Substance to convert traditional diffuse and specular maps into new PBR map types.